people like to write wine memoirs and they like to write wine stories and things like that, but there isn't a whole lot. And I guess the other thing is that I have a point of view. A lot of the things in the book are opinionated. I am not apologetic about it. I make it very clear that it's my opinion, but I say ridiculous things. I think my favorite thing that I came up with in the book is, why don't the grapes that you eat from the grocery store taste anything like wine?
Mm-hmm.
And I say that it's the same reason that you have a dog for a pet, but not a wolf. They're the same genus, but the difference between them is too much. You want the dog, you do not want the wolf. I try to use a lot of analogies like that to say wine is a difficult subject and it's a high barrier to entry. Anybody that tells you that wine is easy is ridiculous. It's not. And you have to know something to get in. It's just where you get your knowledge and how understanding or like normal or nice or kind someone is going to be towards you when you don't know something.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 51. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Elizabeth Schneider, who has just published her first book, and it's called Wine for Normal People. I love that. I introduce Elizabeth more fully when we jump into the episode. I'll also put links to Elizabeth's website, her new book, and social media handles in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/51. If you'd like to get a free copy of my Ultimate Food and Wine Pairing Guide, just email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know what you like about the podcast and what I can do to improve it for you. I'm getting some amazing feedback from wine lovers who are taking my new free online video wine class called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. You'll learn about that plus my new in-depth paid course called the Wine Smart Course, a full-bodied framework to taste, pair, and buy wines like a pro when you register at nataliemclean.com/class. Before we dive into the show, I'd like to give a shout out to Betsy Payne Watson from Chelsea, Michigan, who emailed me to say, quote, "What a great podcast as usual. I found it rather surprising that Texas has such large acreage of land devoted to vineyards. I don't believe I've ever had a Texas wine, which is surprising given all the business trips I made to Texas when I was working. I have a friend who winters in Texas, so I plan to discuss this with her the next time we chat. Take care. Have a good week, Bets." Well, Bets, I'm so glad that you enjoyed episode 46. I know you're going to enjoy this one with Elizabeth. On with the show. We have a very special guest. So our guest is an award-winning host of one of the most popular wine podcasts on the planet. It's called Wine for Normal People. Love it. She's also a certified sommelier by the Court of Master Sommeliers, a certified specialist of wine by the Society of Wine Educators, and co-founder of the Underground Wine Events, which brings together wine lovers with terrific small artisanal wineries and a public speaker. These events are hosted around the United States. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Wine for Normal People, to be published by Chronicle Books November 2019. She holds an MBA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's worked for one of the largest wineries on the planet with marketing and training. She thinks and talks about wine in such an unusual, candid, and refreshing way. I am so excited about this conversation. I know you're going to love it. And she joins me live from her home in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome, Elizabeth Schneider.
Hello.
I love your concept of wine for normal people, but let's start with how you define normal people, especially when it comes to wine.
This is a question I get all the time. People love saying, oh, I'm not normal or whatever, if they're being cheeky. And my point about normal wine is that, like you, I did not start out in the wine industry. I had a good, 10 years out of the wine industry, just being a regular working person. So, I had a 9 to 5 job. Wine was something I was interested in. I took classes and I went to tastings and stuff like that. I was in Boston. And I just did not understand why people were so mean about it, why they seemed to want to hoard information, why nobody really wanted to share. It just seemed like such a strange thing. So then I went and worked for a big winery and I was like, okay, you know what? They make all stripes of wine. Can't be snotty here, right? There's no possible way. They were total snots too. So then I was very frustrated. I had an opportunity to work on a training program for servers. And I had been a server. So I spent a lot of time in catering, serving and bartending and stuff like that. So I really understood that world. I understood that you need to come at this from a place of, okay, you know what? People have other stuff going on in their lives. And wine is important to them as a hobby, but it's not the only thing that they have. So if you do something in wine, if you're trying to explain things, you might have to explain it 3 or 4 times because it's not top of mind to them. They're not like you and I, where every day we're reading these big books and talking to producers and talking about really esoteric. They don't know. I mean, you got to remind them of stuff. And there's no shame in that. That doesn't make them stupid. It doesn't mean they should be talked down to. Many of these people are way smarter than anybody in the wine industry. So the concept for wine for normal people was like, how about just talking to people who have other stuff going on in their lives, who are intelligent? And I don't mean to disparage anybody else, but I'm not a dummies person. I'm not going to treat you like you're stupid. I'm going to treat you like you're an intelligent person, and you might just not know about this topic. So I come to you where you are, right?
Absolutely. No, that's great. That's sound. And I noticed in your podcast, when you'd bring up words like terroir, you'd redefine them because, the listeners, they're intelligent, but as you say, they've got other things going on in their life. They don't have a handy wine dictionary where they use terroir in common everyday language. And
I'm only laughing because here's a little behind the music. I don't like the wine industry that much. And there was a very prominent person in the wine industry. Really, I feel like regular wine drinkers would never know who this person is, but they wrote up the podcast and they were like, oh, Schneider redefines the terms all the time. It's so mundane and stupid, and her pronunciation is ridiculous. And I'm thinking to myself, God, this is somebody who does not understand audio, because sometimes if someone's trying to get a wine and you say it with some crazy accent, they're not going to know what the heck you're talking about. That's A. And B, it's like, yes, I am redefining it because I'm sorry, but Michael in New Jersey, who is working in biotech, is thinking about that. And maybe he forgot what terroir was. So I'm just going to give you a 1-second description of it so you know what it is.
Absolutely. It's just good journalism too. Like top-notch journalists, whatever, for the New York Times, wherever, define their terms when it's jargon. It's insider jargon.
Right.
You don't just proceed like everybody knows and it's a club that we all belong to.
Yep. It's kind of silly. But again, there's a lot of very strange things that happen in wine journalism also, like things that have been perpetrated for a long time. I mean, I don't think people are purposely misleading people, but when you actually go to the region and learn about stuff, I mean, one of the major things that people talk about, like, here's a great example, rivers, right? People always talk about, okay, wine regions are in rivers. Why are wine regions on rivers? And people say, well, they reflect heat. But they don't reflect heat. They reflect light, right? So light is what helps with photosynthesis, not heat. But we hear that over and over again, even from very well-established sources. So it seems to me that I feel like in the way too long that I've been in this industry, I've learned that there are things that keep happening, these narratives that keep going on. And so I'm happy sort of not to be a part of that in a way. I don't want to get caught up in that.
Why is that perpetuated? Is it just lazy not checking the facts?
The authority whoever that may be, writes a book on it, and they put it in. And then when you go to the region or when you're talking to farmers, then they tell you what it actually is. And then it makes sense because in biology, we all learn that light is important for photosynthesis. Heat is not a part of that. So we hear this narrative over and over again. And then it winds up in books because one person wrote it. And, honestly, that's how wine stuff is done. So everything is, right? We're all just iterating off of other people's work, right? So all of the authorities now, well, okay, so 40 years ago, it was Clive Coates, and then it was Hugh Johnson, and now it's Jancis Robinson. And so this goes on and on and on, and they're iterating off of one another's work. So what happened 40 years ago, we've learned more, but sometimes I feel like it's not always updated.
And you are so transparent and so bold in what you're willing to talk about, Elizabeth. I don't want to get you in hot water, but do you think that these big authorities are just taking received wisdom? Like, is that what's happening?
I really don't know. Look, these are not dumb people, right? These are people who are intelligent. I'm sure they're doing their own research, but, they also are not always updating their own books, which I'm sure that too from Insider Baseball, right? So these are very large books. They're not doing all of that.
No.
So they're working off of information that they had before. But, again, I don't want people to go to these sources and be like, oh my gosh, I need to question everything. It's just that over the course of time, most of it is correct. I don't want to make some sort of big scandal out of this, but there are a few things that I feel like keep getting perpetuated that are like, but that's just not right. It's either not right or it's not explained very well. And it may be the latter, but I don't think it's anything malicious. I just think that it just keeps going on. And then the worst thing about it, though, is that everyone is certification bananas right now. And a lot of that is inside of the certification stuff, right? Because they're getting it all off of that. And they may be working off of old versions or whatever. So it's a little bit of a problem, but it's not like a huge scandal. Most of the information is correct. It's just sometimes when I'm talking to people from around the world and I say something that I have researched in a book, they're like, no, that's not right. We hear that all the time from English journalists or whatever, but that's not right. That's not actually true. It does help to get that other perspective, I think.
Absolutely. You sort of alluded to it because I want to get to your book, but you've already brought up certification. So we've got Master of Wine, we've got Master Sommelier, very prestigious designations in the wine business. Do you think they are professional designations? Well, they are, but in the sense of, are they like an MBA, which both you and I hold, or are they something else?
I would actually like to have this conversation with you and not have it be like an interview type thing, because we both have MBAs, right? We both went through the grind. It is not easy to get an MBA. It's a lot of hours of hard work. It's a lot of hours of study. It's things that you don't understand. I know, at least for me, there were some things that I skated on the edge of. Thank God, goodness, I passed, right? But for the most part, it is a very intense course of study. My first year at Chapel Hill, I probably slept like 3 hours a night. It was just brutal, absolutely brutal. And at the end, when you finally get the paper, everyone has been through that. Now, not everyone has worked as hard, but everyone has done the work to get there. So you probably know people in finance, right? The CFA, the Certified Financial Advisor. It's widely regarded as the hardest professional exam that there is. My sister's an attorney. She had to take the bar in Massachusetts, not an easy bar. But the pass rates for these are in certainly the double digits. And although the CFA, I think, is more like 40% or 30% first time, I'm not really sure. Maybe some of the listeners know. And the bar is much higher, right? The bar exam, not the bar, like the actual bar. But the point of the professional certification, from what I understand, is let's get a group of people who will study very hard, and they will acquire knowledge that we think will make them better professionals. And then they will take this exam and they will go out into the world and be better professionals, right?
Right.
When I think about my friends that have taken the CFA exam and struggled and failed and passed and whatever, that's the whole goal, right? The goal is eventually they want to make more money, blah, 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 whatever. I don't know any other exam besides the Master of Wine and the Master Sommelier where the pass rate is 3 to 7%.
3 to 7%. That is shockingly low.
That's not a professional certification.
Okay.
That's a club,
It's
right?
a club.
So It has to be because, again, I'm taking it out of the wine context and I'm taking this as like a regular person. As you're looking at certifications, that's not a professional certification because most people who are very good in the business cannot achieve that. Then it's something besides a professional certification. We have to ask ourselves, who is administering an exam that is that difficult that people can't pass it? How many times are people taking it? How much money is involved in taking and retaking it? Who is deciding how difficult this material is? And does it actually make you a better professional? And my argument would be, and again, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to like turn the tables and ask you, Natalie, also, because you know a lot of people have taken these exams, is what does it do to these people? I mean, I feel like some of the best wine professionals I know cannot achieve this. It's incredibly political and not so much the master of wine. The master of wine is a little bit more straightforward, but the master sommelier is incredibly political. It's an oral exam. And service, I mean, people can decide whatever they want. If they want you in the club, you get in the club. If they don't want you in the club, they don't want you in the club. And by the way, when was the last time you saw somebody on the floor of a restaurant ask, can you tell me all of the appellations of China?
So esoteric information that really doesn't have real world practical application on most restaurant floors. As you say, it should be a designation that allows you to do your job better as a sommelier, presumably.
Right?
Yeah. So people do go into other spheres after getting this designation, but most are working somms. So yeah, right. I have to agree with you.
And the other thing that is not taken, like Bianca Bosker's book, Cork Dork, actually did a really good job of showing this. I mean, these people don't make that much money. So now you're asking them to spend all this money on exams, all this money on wine, all their time. They become quite disconnected. I mean, that Somm movie showed that. I couldn't really watch past the first one because it was just, I mean, it really shows the bad side of the wine industry that after a while, these people become so obsessed with this one thing that how are they going to connect with us at the table? How will they be able to relate to us without being snobby, without looking down on us because we ask questions like, I had someone tell me the other day, like when they first started out in wine, somebody said, you should ask for the sommelier. And they said, is that a red wine? Yeah, but some people are there, right? So like, you can't possibly bridge that gap if you're at this level. And yet here we are. I think all of that needs to change. I also wish that there were more options for consumers who wanted to learn. I just don't think there's enough options available. And everyone thinks that if you get a certification, that somehow makes you superior to people.
Right.
And I don't think that's true. I'm sorry. I know a lot of really great wine professionals who have no certifications.
Exactly. And writers who don't have any certifications, but have learned.
You don't need it. You have to be smart. There's no replacement for smart.
There's no replacement for smart, and there's no solution for dumb. I can't help you. Anyway, that's what my grade 7 teacher used to say. Yeah, there's no fix for dumb. But personally, Elizabeth, when I went for an MBA, I had a soft, artsy-fartsy background. I studied, English at...
I didn't study. I was poli-sci, but I went to Wesleyan in Connecticut. I mean, you can't get more liberal arts than that.
That's a great school. Yeah, absolutely. I did PR and then I did English. I thought, I'm going to be in the velvet ghetto forever if I don't get an MBA that says, yes, I can do other things than be press release lady. And I'm not trying to disparage public relations, which is a really great field for a lot of people. But I thought, I've got to cement it in with MBA. But that was the intention, not to lord it over people with butterfly swaps at dinner, like to talk about whatever.
The only time I ever talk about it is because I went to Carolinas and I live in Raleigh now, and Raleigh is right next to Chapel Hill. So, people, it's a connection that I have to this area.
Yeah.
But it did help enormously in starting my own business and giving me a lot of courage. It did other things for me, right? In fact, in some ways, funny enough, I also was like, God, I don't have the skills to pay the bills here. Like, I am not able to make this, put all the pieces together. I need, there's some definite pieces of information that are missing out of my education here. So that is why I wanted to go back, actually, really to learn. I mean, more financial opportunity, of course, but the things that I took away were things I never, ever thought I could, really cementing in my head that integrity in business is really important. Teamwork in business is really important. Understanding I am not somebody who ever wants to have a big company or a lot of employees. I could barely manage a part-time virtual assistant. So I do better working on my own. These are things that I learned while I was there, and also confidence. So I think that this is the exact opposite of what the master sommelier gives people. Yeah. It gives them a lack of confidence, right? It makes them feel terrible about themselves, which is not where we want to be in this industry. And actually, as drinkers, we also need to question that. Mm-hmm. We cannot look at people who have certifications and say, oh, you're so much smarter than somebody else. We need to be like, well, fine, you took a test, but what do you know?
Right. And how do you apply it in relation to me as the customer? Like,
yes.
It doesn't matter how impressive you are. You've got a very supportive crowd here, Elizabeth.
That's nice. I'm sure that some people will be like, wow, this person is just jealous that she's not a master sommelier. I have heard that before. I've heard that comment before, but I started down that path. I'm a certified sommelier. And once I saw what was ahead of me, I was like, I'm not doing that. I didn't want to.
Yeah,
it didn't make sense.
Do you think at all, so we've talked about maybe it's an exclusive club, but this 3 to 7% pass rate, is it a money grab scheme? Like, is that at all part of it? I mean, I know we can't read the minds, so you can never read minds and intentions. So that's sort of an unfair question. But sometimes I wonder, personally, it's like, okay, that is just insane.
Honestly, if we had thought of this, we'd be making a lot of money. Let's face it. I don't think it started like that. I don't think there was somebody in the UK that was like, I think it genuinely started out like, they had a problem in the UK because that's where all this stuff started. They had a problem in the UK that there were a lot of people that just didn't know what was going on. So they wanted to sort of formalize it. But the book, I wonder where it is. It's like hilarious. I would love to quote it for you because it's like, and this is for like Americans too and Canadians. If the Queen comes into your restaurant, the first time you address her is by Your Majesty. And then after that, you call her ma'am.
Oh.
And it's like, really? I mean, I'm not sure that most people need to know that, but that's the official book that they recommend.
Wow, that is esoteric. That's fascinating. I could go on with that forever down that rabbit hole, which I find fascinating. But to broaden it out a little bit, you've got a book coming out in November called Wine for Normal People. Yay!
Yes, I have like the cover mock-up here.
You
it's
do?
It's
awesome.
It's messy. It's just on paper. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. This has been a while in the making. Tell us what the inspiration was for this. There's a lot of primers out there on wine. Did you feel that no one was talking to normal people, or what triggered that idea for this book?
So it started actually when I was at the big winery and I was doing that server training. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, gosh, like what books could we use? And people also, as I started the podcast, kept saying, like, what books would you recommend? And I'm like, I have one, like Karen McNeil's The Wine Bible. But that's so comprehensive. It's tough, right? And it also is a wonderful book, but it doesn't filter the information for you. It just tells you the information, which again is the point of that book. And it's a wonderful book. Okay. So that is like not throwing shade on the Wine Bible at all.
No.
The Dummy series, I mean, I guess that's basic information, but it is super basic. And then I feel like there was nothing in that middle ground at all. I'm like looking at, everybody wants to write a real specific wine book these days. So there's stuff on grapes and wine. And then there's the tome writers, as I call them, like I've already mentioned them, Hugh Johnson and Clive Coates, Jancis Robinson, Oz Clarke. These people, Oz Clarke is a little bit more casual, but they write these tomes, these huge freaking books that like, who wants to plow through that? And then if you don't know the jargon, then you got to look it up. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I just thought, you know what? Why not reinvent the wheel? Why not reinvent the wheel?
Good for you. No, it's true. Like when I think about it, the way you frame it, it's true. There's the spectrum. There's the tomes, and Karen McNeil's more accessible, but a thick book. So you've got that end of the spectrum, and then you've got the Wine for Dummies or even shorter, simpler books. You're right. I don't know that there's something in the middle.
Pretty sure there's not. I had to do a lot of research for the book proposal to get it sold. Okay. I'm telling you, there's very, very little, if anything. I mean, people like to write wine memoirs and they like to write wine stories and things like that, but there isn't a whole lot. And I guess the other thing is that I have a point of view. A lot of the things in the book are opinionated. I'm not apologetic about it. I make it very clear that it's my opinion, but, I say ridiculous things. I think my favorite, like the best thing that I came up with in the book is why don't the grapes that you eat from the grocery store taste anything like wine? Mm-hmm. And I say that it's because it's the same reason that you have a dog for a pet, but not a wolf. They're the same genus, but the difference between them is too much, right? You want the dog, you do not want the wolf. So, I mean, I try to use a lot of analogies like that to say wine is a difficult subject and it's a high barrier to entry. Anybody that tells you that wine is easy is ridiculous. It's not. And you have to know something to get in. It's just like where you get your knowledge and how understanding, or for lack of a better word, like normal or nice or kind someone is going to be towards you when you don't know something.
Absolutely.
Like, I told that story about this guy that said that he thought a sommelier was a kind of wine that he should order. And the thing that actually struck me about that, just coming from my orientation, was like, I was so angry at the friend who recommended that and then didn't immediately write back to that guy and say, no, this is what it is. She just left him hanging there. And I think that that's terrible. I think that's really unfair. So,
absolutely. No, I love your comparisons, Elizabeth, and you're talking in word pictures, which I absolutely love. Dog versus wolf. It's so concrete. Tell us a bit more. What was the most surprising thing or insight you learned about wine while you were researching for your new forthcoming book, Wine for Normal People?
The first chunk of the book is wine vocabulary, which I know a lot of people put in the back in the glossary, but I think it's incredibly important not to do that. So wine speak is the first chapter. And then I go into other things like how wine gets its flavor, tasting terms, things like that. And, the differences between old and new world. The bulk of the book is the region by region breakdown and basically put into really normal wine terms. And so some of the more fascinating things that I learned while researching were historical things. I love history. So all of the historical things about the wine regions, the whole history of Champagne, for instance, I find just incredibly fascinating.
Why is that?
They've spent so much time trying to get bubbles out of the wine. Dom Perignon was adamant. I mean, if that guy came back today and saw that his name was on that bottle, he perfected the art of making white wine from red grapes. Because in Champagne, it was too cold to make really good red grapes, and the white grapes really weren't very tasty either. So they felt that if they could make white wine out of red grapes, they could get the most flavor and really put their best foot forward. But they never wanted sparkle. Sparkle came by mistake. Sparkle came from stuck fermentations. And because of that, in the springtime, when things would pick up again, then they would have fizz in the wine. It was the British who were like, hey, we like the fizz in the wine. And that's just a very fascinating thing. Also, they had enormous riots before World War I. They were fighting about who was included in Champagne. And it's just a really, really fascinating story. But Champagne, without the support of the British, probably would not be around. So
wow, that's interesting.
They deny that, but that's true.
And do you have a couple of tips from your book, things that we don't normally hear about with common wine advice that are unique to your book that you can share with us now?
The first thing I would say is, I don't think you should drink what you like.
Oh.
I think it is the opposite of that. I think that if you just drink what you like, you wind up in a rut and you never try anything different or new. You don't take risks. And that is not the way to approach wine. Wine is an enormous world. There are a lot of things that are similar. There are things that you don't like now, but that you may like in 5 years. You might not like that Bordeaux right now. But maybe with increased drinking, you may get tired of larger, bigger, fuller bodied wines. And maybe you will like that Bordeaux eventually. Maybe you will like that Pinot Noir from Burgundy eventually. You cannot give up. You have to keep pushing yourself. And you have to go in every time you go into the wine store if you've got, a little bit of extra change. By the way, wine is so inexpensive now for what it is, for the quality we can get. You need to keep pushing yourself. So number one is don't drink what you like, because you will just keep drinking that. And that's not a good idea.
That's great. I like that. Don't drink what you like. But I get what you're saying. The point is experiment. Like, try to broaden your horizons. Don't get in a rut. I think that's good advice too.
Yes, absolutely. And two is that, when thinking about regions around the world and what to expect from them, I use the analogy of where you would wear a jacket during the day in the summertime. And I think that really can inform you as to how the wine is going to taste. So in other words, in the middle of a Napa summer, you are not going to be wearing a jacket. It's going to be blazing hot in the field and in the vineyards. But potentially in the Loire, it might be cool. There might be breezes. It might be, in Champagne, in parts of Germany, maybe it will be hot, but it will generally cool down at some point during the day. And I think if you would think about places that you might need a jacket during the day, those are places that are going to have higher acidity wines that maybe pair better with food oftentimes, wines that are kind of minerally, that are not fruit first, all of those kinds of things.
That is great. I am loving this. Truly is a fresh perspective. Where would you wear a jacket in the day? The dog wolf. I'm liking that. I've got the Waterkloof from South Africa Cabernet. What do you have in your glass? You haven't had a chance.
I have an Altos di Sorona Albarino. God, it tastes like salt water. I love it.
Salt water. Nice.
Like 92 degrees here, Fahrenheit. And so I needed something really refreshing because I spent the whole day at the pool with my children. And so,
with your kids. Take a sip, Elizabeth. My goodness. I've been just keeping you talking while I can sip.
Believe it or not, I'm sure you know this, it's very difficult to get wines from Canada here. So I've had limited exposure. I did a trip up to Okanagan. And if you do listen to that podcast, you will never be my friend again because I got so much flack from that. So the wines of
Why did you get flack from that? I have to ask.
Because the wines of British Columbia brought me up there and I love them. They are the nicest people ever. And I'm not disparaging them. However, they brought me up with some travel bloggers. And what we did was we went to like a lot of really gimmicky wineries that were around the lake. And we did not go to some of what I think are probably the most promising areas in BC, Osoyoos and Oliver, and those places that are down south in the Golden Bench. Is that what it's called?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Area. Yeah. So every night at dinner, after tasting these wines, which were really not very good, it was gorgeous, absolutely breathtaking, but the wines were not very good. I would be like, can we please order something from Oliver or Osoyoos? And those wines really, I think, have enormous potential. However, the stuff that's a little bit farther north, I think it's harder. It's not there yet. And I don't know if it's going to get there. That's my opinion. Hate me for it if you want. Niagara is completely different. And I have not had an opportunity to have a lot of still wines from there. I've had a lot of dessert wines from there just because they're not really available. So the closest I've gotten is the Finger Lakes. I have not had a ton of wines. I have a couple of Cab Francs from up there, a few Rieslings. Nothing big. So I do need to make a trip up there, but I do love Finger Lakes. I know that the area of Niagara, I have had some of the wines and I think that they have great potential.
They do. Yeah, you do need a trip up there. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's hard to get them here. So that's one thing you definitely need to know. The stuff from everywhere. It's just that I happen to be in New York. So that was how I was able to try stuff from Niagara. Yeah.
And that's something we both keep in mind. Like, are you going to write about a wine no one can drink? I mean, yes, people want you to see the region, but if your readers or your listeners, whatever, can't get it, it seems like an exercise in frustration.
It is. And the only thing that we have that I'm not sure that you guys have, because your laws are more restrictive in Canada, is that a lot of states do overlook the law that you can ship from a retailer out of state.
Right. Yeah, we're going through that. There's a whole tangle of legislation that is just, please.
And we have a Supreme Court case that is pending on this right now. Okay. And one of the guests that I have on a fairly regular basis to update us on stuff like this is this guy, Tom Wark, who's the head of the National Association of Wine Retailers. Yep. And he has helped write the briefs to bring this to the court. This is not a political thing, right? I'm sure that you guys must think we are. Well, you probably always think we're crazy, but this is, we're going through a really crazy time right now. But from a Supreme Court perspective, this is not a political decision. It really is interpretation. So this is not retailers on the Democrat side and distributors on the Republican side. This is something that really has to do with something called the Commerce Clause in the United States Constitution. It's already been ruled on. We're just trying to get an extra, okay, now retailers can ship without anybody obstructing them because the states all want to obstruct. So we're hoping the decision should come out in another couple of weeks. If that opens up, then that means that everybody in the United States can order wines from bigger markets like Chicago and from New York and from California, places in California, LA. You have bigger access to stuff. And that would be fantastic because then if I do talk about a really crazy small wine, everyone can get it, which right now is harder.
And hopefully we'll take a note out of your book in Canada if we see that pass. So
Yeah,
who knows,
that would
right?
be great, right? Yeah. I mean, we're adults. This is I don't even want to get started on this, but it just drives me nuts that they really, when you get wine delivered to you, they check your ID. They're very strict about it. And I just feel like, this is a legal product. I mean, you can order a gun or a samurai sword online and no one has to sign for it. But
that's true. That's the same up here in Canada. We had folks from the Canadian Vintners Association. It was just shocking. They did a test and they ordered a gun from across the country, got it. Wine, no.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems bizarre.
So we can order your book online now through Amazon, Borders, Barnes and Noble.
And you can ask your indie bookstore to get it. All sorts of different ways to do it. Yeah. So yes, it will be released November 5th. I hate being like the person that's like, follow me on social media, but
just do it.
So Wine for Normal People on Instagram and Facebook, and at Normal Wine on Twitter. There's a newsletter also. A lot of people are totally off social media these days. And so they're just doing newsletter, and that's fine too. I send it out once a month. I can't go more than that. So I'm telling you, I am a one-woman show, so I can only do what I can do. Whatever one person can do is what I can do.
You can do a lot.
Yeah, hopefully, right? I don't sleep much, so there's that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole thing about, so first of all, it's hard to make a living as a writer, folks, just from experience. Do you have an audio version, Elizabeth, of this book?
I am actually recording the audio version pretty soon. So yeah, of course. I mean, it's funny because it was so Audible, Amazon is doing it. And at first it was does she have to do an audition? And my agent was like, here are 200 auditions.
Yeah, that's right. She knows what she's doing.
Okay, I wrote the book and I'm a podcaster. This should be good. So they didn't even have a problem with it. They didn't make me audition for it which is
for your own book. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm the only one who's really going to understand the jokes anyway. So of course, because I couldn't write a book without some tongue-in-cheek humor. So
no, people are going to love your style. But anyway. You and I both have built brands around our names. I have no intention ever of selling the brand. I am the brand. It'll die when I die. So, I'm not in it to flip it.
We can do something joint because we're actually women in wine who are not competitive or
bet.
It's against each other, which is sometimes rare in this industry.
Yeah, the rising tide lifts all the boats. You know what? There's so much room for many books, many podcasts.
Yes. I think that the people who feel competitive, I think this is a really funny thing. I think when I was younger, I used to feel worried about that. And now you just have to do whatever it is that you do feel is the right thing to do. You just do, as the kids say, you do. I'm a Gen Xer, so I don't say this, but you do you, right? You just be whoever you are. And I guess that, maybe at my own peril and your own peril, we build the brands around ourselves or we build a shtick around ourselves. But, it is what it is. The only difference between us and everybody else in the wine world and people that connect to us and others in the wine world is that we just present information in a different way.
Absolutely. Well, Elizabeth, my goodness, I haven't even gotten to the other 56 questions.
I'm sorry. I'm a podcaster. I talk for a living, right?
You are a gift. You are a gift as a guest. Oh my gosh, really? Seriously. Don't need to lead the horse to any water. The horse is just doing fine on its own.
You can see I'm quite thirsty. I drink all the time.
I didn't give you a chance. Elizabeth, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention right now before we wrap up?
No, I do want to say one really important thing to my listeners and fans. The one thing that keeps me going every single day and has kept this whole thing alive is the listeners and the readers and the fans. And I'm getting a little misty talking about it. I'm not a religious person. I'm not saying this sort of in a religious way, but I could not be a more blessed person to have built a community of nicer, more kind of like-minded, wonderful, open people. And every day, and I really mean this, every single day, I am thankful. I laugh, I smile. It has gotten me through so much in terms of self-doubt and wondering whether or not I should keep going and any kind of hurdle with the book or anything else. The listeners and the supporters have meant more to me than I could possibly ever imagine. My level of gratitude is, I can't even say. So, I don't have the biggest audience in the wine world. I'm not the most popular person, and I couldn't care less because I have some of the nicest people in my tribe. And I just want to thank them so much if they're watching this.
I say amen, and I'm not religious either, but amen. Amen to that. I get it. It's been so great. So we can connect with you at winefornormalpeople.com and a variation on that on various social media channels. Order your book. Anywhere else that you want to mention where we can find you?
No, just, the podcast is available anywhere you get podcasts.
Yep.
And I also actually will write you back if you write to me. Usually it might take me a really long time because I'm so slow, but I will get back to you. The shorter the comment, the more likely you are to get something out of me.
That's great. Oh, Elizabeth, we want to talk to you again in the future, please.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm such a fan of yours. You've been so successful, and it's a real honor to be on your show.
It was fun. This was delightful. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay.
Right. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Here are my takeaways from this terrific discussion with Elizabeth. I love Elizabeth's take on who normal people are when it comes to wine. Those whose lives aren't consumed reading big wine tomes and studying vintage charts, but who just love wine. 2, Elizabeth has an interesting perspective on the Master of Wine and Master Sommelier programs, that they are less a professional designation and more like a small private club, particularly when the pass rate is only 3 to 5%, and much of the esoteric wine knowledge doesn't get put to practical use by sommeliers when they're dealing with restaurant customers. Number 3, Elizabeth's new book, Wine for Normal People, is a must-buy. Her tips are so practical, yet so memorable, with analogies like the dog and the wolf to explain wine versus table grapes, or wearing a jacket in the summer in regions that make zesty, crisp wines due to a cool climate. And number 4, we both have a love of history and colorful stories, like how Dom Perignon would turn over in his grave about bubbles in champagne. You'll find links to Elizabeth's new book, website, and social media handles in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/51. I've also posted a link to the video version of this interview. So what was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Please share that with me on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie MacLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie MacLean Wine. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it, especially one who would enjoy Elizabeth's smart wine tips. My podcast is easy to find, whether you search Google on its name, Unreserved Wine Talk, or on my name. And finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level, join me in my free online video class at nataliemaclean.com/class. I can't wait to share more wine stories with you next week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this one. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps while you're reading Wine for Normal People. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.